Hey everybody, this is George Ehret from youtube.com/George Ehret. Just want to issue a bit of a correction from my top 5 favorite films video. So I said that Frances Ha is a coming-of-age movie, and even though it follows the same beats as a coming-of-age film, it technically is not, because Frances isn't necessarily growing up, she's just realizing that she's too immature for her age. This isn't her necessarily discovering the world like a teenager would in a regular coming-of-age film. There are exceptions to this rule, but Frances Ha is not one of them. And I feel it's rather appropriate that I make this correction for this video. So, you might have noticed that there is a large abundance in coming-of-age films. I mean, there's always been plenty of coming-of-age films, like Rebel Without a Cause, 400 Blows, Breakfast Club, and Rumble Fish. But now, in the 2010s, there seems to be an overabundance. Some examples are Lady Bird, 8th Grade, Spectacular Now, and Moonlight. And seeing all these coming-of-age movies, whether they're great, terrible, or mediocre, made me draw a conclusion that there's just this huge movement of coming-of-age films, and we're honestly getting a fatigue. So in that Ram Ranch video I did, I mentioned how there's some eras in film history where Hollywood made the same type of film for at least a decade. It kind of went from film noir to Vietnam War to gangster/crime and to superhero. And there's little sub-movements in there, like all the found footage movies. Thanks, Jason Blum. And I feel like this next movement of film is coming of age. Let me break it down to you this way. Little Miss Sunshine planted this seed all the way back in 2006, and then Superbad gave it water. Fast forward a few years later, we get the Spectacular Now, which is when it started to sprout. Then Moonlight is when people started noticing it, and then Lady Bird is when it got big, meaning that's when everyone started to love it. Now, a lot of these films are pretty great, like the 4 I just mentioned, but there's also some that are just ass. When I think of the mediocre to terrible coming-of-age movies, I tend to think of the same things. Boring characters, flat filmmaking, an iPod playlist for a soundtrack, and a very weak script in which the characters are talking like they're 40 instead of 16. Now, thankfully, these are things that I was relieved to have been completely absent in Olivia Wilde's directorial debut, Booksmart. Now, it's kind of impossible to talk about this film without comparing it to Superbad. The premise is kind of the same. 2 people who don't normally party decide to go all out right before high school graduation. Let's not forget that the 2 films also have familial ties. However, the differences start flowing in when looking at the films themselves. While Superbad doesn't necessarily have very flashy and stylistic filmmaking, Booksmart actually does. Booksmart has some very impressive one-takes and tracking shots throughout the film. It's also got some great editing. It has a more fantastical and modern presentation than Superbad. Superbad kind of felt like it was a film you'd watch in the 80s, except it took place in 2007, which is a very unique approach to filmmaking. Booksmart is very clearly made for today's youth. Not only does it have brief references to current events as of 2018, but it also prominently features current staples of how teenagers communicate, such as cell phones and social media. Booksmart is also, in concept, more about these 2 girls partying like they should have in high school rather than just getting laid. And neither of these premises are necessarily bad, but they do make the 2 films very different and cause them to elicit different responses from the audience. Now, remember those films I referenced at the beginning as coming-of-age films that have come out in the 2010s? Those are just films that I love a lot. There's plenty of other coming-of-age films that some of you might not even heard of. For example, All Summer's End is a direct-to-DVD film starring Caitlin Dever and Ty Sheridan from Ready Player One. And it's very mediocre and cliche. It felt like it was trying to be the Spectacular Now, except the film was very boring and underdeveloped. And quite honestly, if it weren't for my girl Caitlin, this movie would be worthless. Plus, this dude's accent is awesome.
I feel different around you than I do with the guys.
Oh, I would hope so.
Shut up. That's not what I mean. I mean, I can be myself more.
I tried this one chili and it set my mouth on fire and I had to drink a 2-liter of Mountain Dew.
There's also Hot Summer Nights, which is kind of like Goodfellas meets, I don't know, Call Me By Your Name, except it's just boring, completely forgettable. There's nothing interesting about it. And even though this is just a television show, 30 Reasons Why is pretty egregious.
Everybody hit the floor. Try to barricade barricade the doors. Is it a mental health issue?
Oh, speaking of Netflix, The Kissing Booth. It's legitimately one of the worst movies ever made. Now, there's even more examples that I can use here, but I don't necessarily have the energy or patience to do that. There's a long list of coming-of-age films that range from okay to garbage that have come out in the past 10 years, and the ones that are genuinely great seem to be few and far between. So much so that I could probably count all of them on my fingers. But at this point, there's too many of them coming out that are cookie cutter and forgettable films. It's in some way like the horror genre, because they're very easy to just copy and paste the same story and change the characters and like locations. So I kind of want to spend some time talking about how Booksmart separates itself from the other coming of age films of this generation. How it manages to be different from the likes of those films, even the great ones, like 8th Grade and Lady Bird. For one, the main characters in Booksmart are not necessarily meant to be reflections of ourselves. Amy and Molly are not Christine McPherson or Kayla Day, where they're who everyone was in high school or middle school, but instead they're what we want ourselves to be, to an extent. Sure, we don't wish that we were antisocial or that we looked down on everyone as immature and mindless sheep, but we do often wish that we were as smart as they are, or that we were class president or valedictorian or something like that. And again, this isn't saying that one thing is bad or one thing is good. It's just that the main characters in most of these coming-of-age films are not the same people as Amy and Molly. Second, Booksmart has a much more flashy and idealistic approach to its story than most coming-of-age films, really in general. Lady Bird and The Spectacular Now have some really great directing and both have a unique visual presentation, but they admittedly both have kind of a standard template of shot, reverse shot. And again, that's not necessarily a bad thing in the case of these films. That's because there is more under the surface than just the sitcom style of editing. But the sitcom style filmmaking with All Summer's End is just... Why didn't the Curb Your Enthusiasm theme play throughout the movie? However, Booksmart doesn't do this at all. Olivia Wilde threw this visual approach out the window and did several long takes and smooth camera movements. She framed each scene in a way that illustrates the perspectives of these two characters in a way that brings their world to life in a way that no other coming-of-age films of this nature have. There's some very nice touches in this film that bring the story full circle. I'm not saying that Booksmart has as many layers as something like The Holy Mountain, because that's absurd. But if you pull back the blanket and you pull the layers off the onion, there's a lot of substance in the way that this film is presented. And lastly, the writing in this film makes it feel more modern than most of the other coming-of-age films in this era. Now, this is something that 8th Grade excels at, and admittedly does a lot better than Booksmart. 8th Grade is in many ways about the internet, so it really had to get it right. Now, of course, this isn't really surprising considering that this film is written and directed by Bo Burnham, who's been on YouTube since 2006, and is basically who he is today because of the internet. But even then, the fact that this film perfectly represents teenagers' lives on social media is quite the impressive feat. Now, this is something that Lady Bird and Moonlight don't have to rely on because they don't take place in the 2010s, or at least in Moonlight's case, not entirely. But this is something that the film Every Day, which is a fine movie overall, handled pretty poorly. It's like the film couldn't afford to pay Facebook, Twitter, and other social media platforms to use them in the film, so they had to make it all up as they went along. It comes off as very cheap and lazy. And another prime example, of course, is The Kissing Booth, which has a worse understanding of teenagers than a Lifetime original film. It's like the movie were written by a committee of 50-year-olds who don't know what teenagers are like, and they just have to make it up as they go along. But Booksmart actually feels authentic. It feels like a movie made for 2019. This is accomplished through the actual dialogue the characters are given. They say things that make them feel like millennials. At no point do any of the characters feel like an adult writing for a teenager or a teenager from a different time period from when the movie takes place. And I have to imagine that this was imperative to make the movie work as well as it does.
The core of it was a really great idea, but it needed a reimagining. And so once I, to my complete shock, got the gig, I said, we have to find the most brilliant writer in the world to update this thing and make it really, really special. And that's when I met Katie.
Yeah, so that was fall of 2017. And it was a project that I had been aware of for a while. I think there are sometimes these projects that have been around for, at that time, it had been about almost 10 years, and it was an idea and kind of like a concept that people wanted to make, and they were attempting to do it in different iterations. And there was a first iteration in 2009, and then there was a second iteration, and in both instances, there was an excitement for the possibility to make a story about two smart high school girls, two smart best friends in high school, which was exciting, but I think that it was different attempts in different periods of time as to what you could do with a story about two young smart women. I had wanted to work on a high school comedy for a long time because I think the best ones are timeless and timely. Like, the best ones are very reflective of the generation that they're talking about, the young people that they're talking about, but the stories and the arcs and the themes are timeless. And so the opportunity to try and do that with brilliant young women was very, very exciting.
The best films in general tend to be both timeless and timely. This most definitely applies to coming-of-age films, but if you really think about it, it's the same reason we love science fiction. Would 2001: A Space Odyssey be as iconic had it not been timely for the 1960s during the Cold War and space race while also being relevant for today's society? So where am I going with this? I'm not completely against the idea of Hollywood releasing a lot of similar films during a specific time span, but the problem lies when a lot of them are basically the same film. The best coming-of-age films are films that are different, that bring something very new to the table. Something like Booksmart, like 8th Grade, like Moonlight. The films that are wildly different than the rest of the pack. But here's a question. You want to know what the best coming-of-age film ever made is? It's The Graduate. Even to this day, the film feels very unique and different in comparison to other coming-of-age films, both at the time it was released and today. It deals with the more psychological side of the main character's mind and the pressure that's placed on him. Ben Braddock is an antisocial person and has this giant weight dropped on him by Mrs. Robinson, and then he just wants to marry Elaine and run off with her. And the film's editing and writing reflect this and put you in Ben's head. It's what allows The Graduate to be influential and remembered. And this film came out in 1967. Coming-of-age films appeal to many different people, like myself and, of course, anyone who's named Tristan French. I love coming-of-age films when they're good. The best films in the genre, like The Graduate and 8th Grade and Booksmart and Lady Bird and all the other greats, make it one of my favorite genres. But by that same token, there's just as many bad ones as good ones. A great coming-of-age film is in many ways a character study on the main character or characters. They explore the very messy mind of a teenager and delve into how the character interacts in his or her environment and how they experience life. And it's most certainly what Booksmart does. It shows us the reality that Amy and Molly live in and how they interact with each other and their peers. It's also what other great coming-of-age films do, putting us in the main character's shoes and making us film like we know or are them. I don't want to dismiss these middle-of-the-road coming-of-age films as soulish cash grabs, because I know that these filmmakers had a vision and knew the story they wanted to tell. The problem all comes down to the execution and the writing. If All Summer's End or Every Day had scripts with better stories and characters, then they could have the potential to be great movies. If Hot Summer Nights had a better directing style and was more grounded and subtle in its presentation, it could have the potential to be great. This is exactly why we remember The Breakfast Club, Rebel Without a Cause, Clueless, and The Graduate. They're well written and directed, with great characters and great performances, plus some very well done filmmaking. It's why Booksmart works so well. It's why Moonlight, 8th Grade, Lady Bird, and Spectacular Now work so well. It's because they're different. It's because they take a different approach to the same stories. I have an endless amount of respect for Olivia Wilde and Katie Silberman for bringing this project to life in the way that they did. Because if it weren't for them, then this film would be another forgettable coming-of-age film in a time where there is a coming-of-age fatigue.
What's wrong with you? You want to get pancakes? Fuck yeah, I do. Fuck yeah.